Wait, Professor, aren't you married? Marcus, where have you been?
I wanna be with you.
The kiss ended the way a stress test ends, not with a sound, but with a number. Marcus Thorne put his hand flat against the drafting table and pushed back 8 inches, the most expensive 8 inches he had ever measured, and the single pool of lamplight held the two of them inside it like a verdict not yet read aloud. That, Dr. Alistair Vaughn said, unhurried, reaching for nothing, capping nothing, was not a question. It was a hypothesis. The black pepper and patchouli and old money hung in the air where his mouth had been. Marcus's pulse was doing something unarchitectural, something with no load tables, and he hated it the way he hated any structure he could not name. I should go. You should. Vaughn stepped back, granting the distance as though it had always been his to give. The doors lock at 9. You have a key. A pause, engineered to the millimeter. Nothing happened here that you did not already know was being built, Mr. Thorne. I merely set the cornerstone. Marcus gathered the rolled vellum, the first edition monograph, the whole weight of the man's attention, and walked out into the November cold with his father's silence sitting in his chest like a second skeleton. Behind him, unhurried, stood a man who had just learned exactly how long Marcus Thorne would stand perfectly still inside a thing that frightened him. 1 second. 2. The dark of the drafting room kept the count, and would keep it for 17 years. He did not take the shortest route back to Drew Hall. He took the route with the most corners because corners were decisions, and decisions were the opposite of standing still. The cold scoured the campus clean. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth once, hard, then made himself stop, because a man who keeps touching the evidence is a man building a monument to it. By the time he reached the quad, he had done what he always did with a load he could not carry. He relabeled it. Not a kiss, a misunderstanding of mentorship, a great man's clumsy reach toward a talent he wanted to protect. File it under generosity. Pour the footing. Move on. It would hold for exactly 6 days. Marcus did not yet know that the things you mislabel do not disappear. They only wait, patient as patrons, for the inspection you were too young to schedule. Devin Price could read a body the way other men read box scores. He looked up from his anatomy textbook the second Marcus came through the door of room 4B, and something in his easy Atlanta face went still. You walked here slow, Devin said, not a question. You only walk slow when you're carrying. I'm structural. Yeah, you keep saying that. Devin set the book face down, a small surrender of his own evening. You've been wearing a face like a closed bank for a week, man. Whatever Mr. Three-Piece is teaching you up in that room after dark, don't. It came out harder than Marcus meant, and the word landed in the middle of the room and sat there. Devin let it. That was the terrible mercy of him. He never rushed to fill the silence, so the silence filled with everything Marcus would not say. Ite, Devin said finally, soft, and picked his book back up. But the loose brick in Marcus's foundation, the one Devin had set in motion weeks ago, shifted 1 more millimeter in the dark. The brass key lived in his sock drawer now, under the folded acceptance letter, and Marcus could feel it through the wood the way you feel a draft through a wall you swore was sealed. He skipped Thursday. He told himself it was the portfolio, the practice film, the test on Monday. Reasons stacked like sandbags against a thing he would not name as flood. On Friday, a folded note appeared under the door of 4B. No envelope, the handwriting impeccable, the fountain ink the color of dried blood. Greatness does not flinch, Mr. Thorne. The door remains open. AV. Marcus read it twice, then placed it in the drawer beside the key, where the dangerous things were learning to keep each other company. Practice was the only church he trusted because, on the field, the loads were honest and the collisions were legal, and nothing wanted anything from him that a body could not pay. He played angry that week. He ran routes like he was trying to outrun a scent. When Devin put him on the turf with a clean shoulder, Marcus got up before the hand arrived, which both of them noticed and neither named. Coach Greer watched it all from under the brim of his cap, saying nothing until the last whistle. Then, low, only to Marcus. "You're playing angry, son. Angry's a fuel. It ain't a plan. A man who builds on it ends up living in the fire he lit." Marcus pulled his helmet off and looked at the cold Washington sky and thought, with the part of him that never stopped drawing, about every beautiful building he'd ever loved that had started as somebody's controlled burn. Vaughn did not chase. Predators with patience never do. He simply appeared on Monday in the corridor outside the lecture hall, fell into step beside Marcus as if they had agreed to walk, and corrected the architecture of the entire week in 4 sentences. "You've been avoiding the studio. Good. It means you felt the weight of it. Lesser men feel nothing. That is why they build nothing." He let a door swing for a passing student, courtly, lethal. "What happened was a measurement of seriousness, Marcus. I do not waste it on boys who will spend their lives losing the argument politely." And there it was, the kiss recast as a credential, the trespass reframed as proof of Marcus's rare worth, the shame turned inside out and handed back to him as flattery. It was the finest piece of construction Marcus had ever watched a man do in real time, and he was 18 and he could not see the scaffolding for the cathedral. "Thursday," Vaughn said, not asking. "We have a fellowship to win." He was gone before Marcus could answer, which was the entire point. Masters never wait for the yes. They install it. By Friday, Devin had had enough of watching his roommate disappear inside his own face. Get dressed. Real clothes, not your funeral chess piece situation. He was already pulling the borrowed Buick keys off the hook. "My cousin plays bass at a spot on U Street. Basement joint. Old heads. Real horns. Catfish in the back that'll make you forgive God. I have a test. You have a face like a closed bank and a soul that needs a saxophone." Devin tossed him his good coat. "Monday's for the test. Tonight's for your blood pressure. Come on, chess piece. Let somebody put the king in motion for once." Marcus put on the coat. He told himself it was for Devin. He was still, at 18, very bad at knowing what he did for himself. The velvet underground announced itself the way the best secret rooms do, not with a sign, but with a sound coming up through the sidewalk. They went down, iron stairs, a red bulb at the landing, a door that breathed warm air and brass and the particular incense of 100 spilled bourbons soaked into a century of wood. Each step took them further under the city, and Marcus felt the weight of D.C. pass overhead. The monuments, the marble, the men who built it, all to be looked at. Until there was only this. A low brick vault, candlelit, where the city kept the part of itself it did not put on postcards. At the bottom, the room opened like a held breath, and Marcus Thorne, who measured everything, stopped measuring. It was a room that listened. He understood that before he understood anything else. A trio worked the low stage, upright bass, brushed drums, a piano with 3 keys that stuck and were loved anyway. A woman in a column of bronze silk stood at the microphone with her eyes closed, and when she sang, the whole vault leaned toward her the way the colonnade on the yard leaned toward permanence. And on a stand at the edge of the stage, unplayed, gleaming under the candlelight, sat a trumpet. Just sitting there, waiting for a man who had stepped out for a cigarette, or for a god, or for a ghost. Marcus's chest did the thing it had been refusing to do since Baltimore. Devon, already drifting toward a corner where men were shuffling dominoes, looked back once and saw it, and, in the only true grace of the night, let him have the room alone. He saw the soldier before he saw the man. At the far curve of the bar sat a young man in a Navy ROTC dress uniform, every crease regulation sharp, every brass button polished to a small private sun. 20 maybe, caramel skin, a military buzz cut, a strong, wide, square jaw, built to take orders and give them. Broad swimmer's chest, narrow hips, the upright bearing of someone trained to scan every room for threats. And his hands were shaking, just slightly. A tremor around the glass of water. He was not drinking. The kind of tremble a body makes when it has spent the entire day holding itself at attention and has finally, in a basement where no one knows him, been allowed to set the weight down, and found that it cannot remember how. Under the bourbon and the brass, when the door behind Marcus swung, a thread of scent reached him, something clean and aquatic, lavender and sea breeze. Davidoff cool water. The cologne of a young man who has not yet learned to hide behind subtlety. Marcus, who knew everything about load and nothing about longing, sat down 2 stools away because it was the only empty seat. He would tell himself that for years, too. Then the man who owned the trumpet came back. He was old, this player, with hands like cracked riverbeds and a stillness that cost decades to earn. He lifted the horn without ceremony, set it to his mouth, and played a single long note that opened in the brick vault like a door into a room Marcus had spent 5 years bricking shut. It was his father's sound. Not the song, the silence inside the song. The held grief that Baltimore clubs had been built to hold. The thing his mother meant when she pressed her palm to his chest and said, "Don't you keep the silence." The note bent and broke and resolved. And Marcus Thorne sat at a bar 2 stools from a trembling soldier and could not breathe through the precision of how much he missed a man he had never once heard say, "I love you." His eyes burned. He did not let them spill. But the wall he had repointed all week developed somewhere below the waterline, a hairline crack the exact shape of a horn. In the corner, a bone slammed the table, and 4 men roared, and Devon's laugh rose out of the noise, unmistakable. Atlanta poured all the way through it. He had found his people in 4 minutes flat, the way he found everything, without asking permission. He caught Marcus's eye across the room, lifted his chin toward the bar, toward the soldier, a small, unmistakable go on. Then he turned back to the game and gave his friend the gift of being unobserved. It would have been easy to call it luck, the empty stool, the absent friend, the playing of the horn. Marcus would learn much later that the architecture of a life is mostly made of the doors other people hold open while pretending not to. "You're not drinking that," Marcus said, because it was true and because the truth was the only sentence he trusted. The soldier did not startle, which startled Marcus. He simply turned his head with the controlled economy of the trained and considered him. The pressed dark clothes, the rigid posture, the architect's stillness answering the soldier's. "I'm on report at 0600, the young man said. His voice was compressed, every word load-bearing, nothing wasted. "Water's the only thing in here that won't cost me." "Then why come to a bar?" A long beat. The horn breathed behind them. "Same reason as you, probably." He nodded once, barely, at Marcus's face, at whatever the music had done to it. "To sit somewhere the rules can't see me and find out what's left." "Julian," the soldier said and offered no hand, because a handshake in the open was a record, and a man in that uniform learned early which gestures could be entered into evidence. "Marcus." They sat with it. Two guarded men in a listening room, each recognizing in the other the particular posture of someone holding a self in escrow. "My father's a general," Julian said at last, to the bar, not to Marcus, the way you confess to the dark. 3 stars. He picked the academy before I could walk. The uniform fits. Everybody says how well the uniform fits. His jaw worked. The tremor crossed his hand again and he pressed it flat to the wood to still it. The distance between what I'm supposed to be and what I am. Some nights, it's louder than the horn. Marcus, who built his whole life on the gap between the body the block expected and the buildings he saw in his sleep, felt the sentence land in him like a plumb line finding true. He did not say me too. He did not have to. Julian heard it in the silence, because Julian had been trained above all else to hear what was not being said. "He doesn't know," Marcus said. It was not a guess. "He can't know." Julian's eyes went to the stairs, the reflex of a man who has rehearsed his own exits in every room he's ever entered. The general doesn't lose, not battles, not arguments, not sons. If he found out what I am, he wouldn't grieve it. He'd correct it. He said the word correct, and Marcus thought unwillingly of another man and another word for the same surgery. He'd have me reassigned, disappeared into some posting where the climate does the disciplining for him. So you wear it. So I wear it. Sharp, every crease. You learn to love the uniform a little because the uniform is the only part of you that's allowed in the daylight. He finally lifted the water, drank, set it down level. "What's your uniform, Marcus?" Marcus looked at his own hands, the soft hands, Coach's favorite phrase, the hands that caught footballs and drew impossible roofs. "A scholarship," he said, "and a man who thinks he's tailoring me a better one." The woman in bronze silk opened her eyes for the next number, and it was as though she had been listening to them the whole time and chosen the song as commentary. It was an old one, slow, a torch standard about loving in a city that would not let you say the name out loud. She sang it without spectacle. The way you tell the truth to one person in a crowded room, and Marcus and Julian sat in the candlelight not looking at each other in the specific charged way that two people only manage when looking would say everything. Their hands rested on the bar, 8 inches apart, the same 8 inches Marcus had measured in the drafting room, except these were not a verdict. These were a question neither of them was free to ask. The trumpet folded itself around her voice. The vault held them both. Devon found him at the bar an hour later, easy, grinning, $1 of dominoes richer, and the grin caught for half a second when he clocked the soldier, the 8 inches, the particular silence the two of them were keeping like a shared coat. "My man," Devon said to Julian, warm, offering the hand Marcus had not been offered, and Julian shook it, brief and careful. Devon's bright eyes moved once between them, reading, always reading. And Marcus watched something pass behind his roommate's face that he had no blueprint for and would not understand until much later. Not jealousy, exactly. Recognition. The quiet arithmetic of a man realizing the door he'd been patiently holding open had a draft coming through it from somewhere else. "We should run," Devon said, still smiling. Only Marcus close enough to hear the half-step the smile had dropped. "Cousin's packing up." On the sidewalk, the cold was a clean shock after the vault's warm brass, and the three of them stood a moment in the orange sodium light while Devon went to bring the car around, leaving, deliberately, Marcus would realize, a man-shaped gap of privacy on the curb. "I don't do this," Julian said, low, his breath ghosting. "Talk. To anyone. It's how people end up in files." "I don't either." "I know." The smallest thing happened then. Julian's hand, still faintly trembling, lifted as if to touch Marcus's sleeve. Just the sleeve, just the wool, the most deniable contact a body could make, and stopped a half-inch short, hovering, the way Vaughn's fountain pen hovered over a drawing without touching it. But this hover was the opposite of that one. This one was asking. The other had only ever been claiming. Marcus did not close the half-inch. He was 18, and he had just been kissed by a man who claimed, and he did not yet know how to let himself be touched by a man who asked. But he did not step back either. For Marcus Thorne, not stepping back was a confession the size of a cathedral. A church bell somewhere counted the hour, and Julian's whole body reassembled itself into the soldier, spine first, the way a building is demolished in reverse. "Oh, 600, he said, already stepping back into the version of himself the daylight was allowed to see. "The general's reviewing the Corps Thursday. I have to be seamless." He paused, and Marcus watched him make a decision that visibly cost him. A man who lived by never leaving a record, choosing to leave one. Julian took a matchbook from his breast pocket, the Velvet Underground stamped in gold on black, and on the inside flap he wrote, in a small, careful hand, a single word and a number. Thursday, 9. "Same stool," he said, and pressed it into Marcus's palm, and his trembling fingers closed Marcus's around it for exactly 1 second, before the soldier turned and walked north into the cold, every crease regulation sharp, carrying his secret up the iron stairs into the daylight that was not allowed to know him. Devon drove them home the long way, windows cracked, the radio low, and for a while he did not perform the easy patter that was his usual weather. "He seemed like a good dude," Devon said eventually, eyes on Georgia Avenue. It was generous, and it was true, and it cost him something to say, and Marcus heard all three things. "Yeah, careful though, a beat. Man in a uniform like that, with a daddy like that, he's carrying as much as you, maybe more. 2 people both holding the whole sky up. Ain't nobody got a free hand to catch the other if he falls." Marcus said nothing. In the dark of the Buick, he held the matchbook in one pocket and felt, in the other, the phantom weight of a brass key, and somewhere behind both, the unasked warmth of the man driving. 3 heats now, confusing themselves in him, and not one tool in his whole young hands for telling which one was foundation and which one was fire. Vaughn knew something had changed before Marcus said a word. Predators with patience are barometers. They read the pressure drop before the storm shows on any map. "You're lighter," he observed Tuesday, circling Marcus's drafting table in the empty studio. "Jacket off. Sleeves never rolled. Something has unclenched in your line. It's better work." The praise was a thermometer slid under the tongue. "Who?" "Nobody. I slept." Vaughn smiled at the lie the way a man smiles at a student's first competent forgery. With pride, and with the certainty that he could break it whenever he chose. "The Obsidian Fellowship Committee meets in 3 weeks," he said, changing the subject in a way that was not a change of subject at all. "I have put your name forward as my sole candidate. Do you understand what I am risking on you, Marcus? My reputation is a building too. I do not let just anyone live in it." He set the brass-bright fountain pen parallel to the table's edge, a small territorial flag. "Thursday," he said. "We refine the portfolio. I'll expect you." Thursday came with 2 doors in it, and Marcus chose the one with the iron stairs. He told himself it was rest. He told himself Vaughn would understand a single missed evening. He told himself a great many things on the walk to U Street, and the trumpet, when he reached the bottom of the steps, called every one of them a lie and forgave him for it. Julian was at the bar. Same stool. He had changed out of the dress uniform into a plain civilian sweater, and the sight of him without the brass was almost unbearable. Like seeing a building with the scaffolding finally down, the true shape of it revealed and undefended. "You came," Julian said, and the soldier's compression cracked just enough to let the relief through. "You wrote it down," Marcus said, sitting, the 8 inches between them somehow already smaller. "You never write anything down?" "No," Julian agreed quietly. "I don't." And he let that be the whole confession, because it was. They talked the way the slow-burning do, around the thing, beside the thing, everywhere but on top of it, and the talking itself became a kind of touch. Julian told him about the academy, the cold showers, the inspections, the older cadet who had once been disappeared mid-semester and never spoken of again, a lesson taught by absence. He told him how he'd learned to still his hands before formation by pressing them flat against cold metal, how the tremor only came out at night, in the dark, in rooms like this one, when the body finally admitted what the day had cost. "It's not fear," he said, turning his palm up on the bar, looking at it like it belonged to someone he was responsible for. "It's the holding. You hold a thing rigid long enough, it shakes when you set it down. Bridges do it. They call it resonance," Marcus said. "When the load and the structure find the same frequency and the bridge starts to move on its own." Julian looked at him then, fully, the aquatic scent of him close in the candlelight. "Yeah," he said, "resonance." And under the bar, slow, unrecorded, Marcus laid 2 fingers across the back of that trembling hand and held it still. Neither of them looked down at the hands. That was the rule the room had taught them. You could have the thing, but you could not witness yourself having it, because witness was the first page of a file. So they looked straight ahead at the old man and his horn, 2 faces lit gold, and underneath the lip of the bar, Marcus's fingers stayed across Julian's knuckles, and slowly, the way set concrete cures, the way the strongest changes happen, without spectacle. The tremor in Julian's hand went quiet. "That's the first time today," Julian said, barely moving his mouth. "The first time what?" It stopped. The horn climbed. The woman in bronze silk hummed under it, and Marcus Thorne, who had been kissed that month by a man who wanted to own him, learned in a candlelit basement the difference between being claimed and being steadied, learned it through 2 fingers and a held breath, and understood, with the part of him that drew music rooms into buildings that had no music programs, that he had just been handed the only blueprint that had ever mattered, and that he had no idea yet how to keep it from being taken. Devon was awake when Marcus came in past 1, sitting up in the dark with the streetlight cutting across the Howard Bison hoodie, and he did not pretend to be asleep. "You were with the soldier?" "Devon, I'm not." Devon stopped, scrubbed a hand down his face, started again gentler. "I'm glad. I am. I just need you to hear me one time, and then I'll leave it alone." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You got that man in the suit moving your walls around at midnight and calling it teaching. My grandmother had a name for that. Said some folks don't rob you. They renovate you, move the walls till the house don't know itself, then hand you the bill and call it a gift." He looked at the trumpet case in the corner. "You finally got a door open in you, man. I watched it happen on the floor of this room in the rain. I don't want the first man to walk all the way through it to be the one charging rent. Julian's not." "I ain't talking about Julian," Devon said quietly, and the distinction sat between them, true and unfixable, the hairline fracture from before now wide enough to see by. Vaughn did not raise his voice. Men who have never been questioned in a room they chose to enter rarely need to. "You missed Thursday." He said it Friday in the office of Old Money, the Venetian light laying its disciplined gold bars across the rug. "I don't ask where you were. I find that knowing a man's distractions only makes me sentimental about removing them." He slid a leather folder across the desk. "The Obsidian Fellowship. The terms are inside. Summer in my firm. My name on everything you touch for the next decade. The committee will say yes because I have not given them the option of no. And football is over the day you sign. A patron does not share, neither does a sport." He steepled his fingers. "I will also say this once as a kindness, because you are young, and the young are careless with their exposures. A man building what you are building cannot afford to be seen in the wrong basements, with the wrong company, leaving the wrong kind of record. The world is always taking attendance, Marcus. I am offering to be the only one holding the role." The room went very cold and very quiet, and Marcus understood that the second sentence had not been advice. It had been a survey of the perimeter. Vaughn already knew there was something to threaten. He just hadn't shown the photograph yet. Thursday's core review made the threat flesh. Marcus had no reason to be near the parade ground, and every reason. He went to see Julian seamless in the daylight, the version of him the world was allowed, and he stood at the rail among strangers and watched 200 cadets stand at attention under a flat white sky, and he saw the general. Vance Sterling reviewed his son's corps the way a wrecking foreman reviews a condemned block, caramel skin gone hard as kiln-fired clay, silver and pepper buzzcut, a face so deeply lined with command that it seemed incapable of any expression but judgment. He stopped in front of Julian. He said something Marcus could not hear, and Marcus watched the man he had steadied with 2 fingers the man whose tremor he had quieted, go absolutely rigid. Not at attention, past attention, into the specific stillness of a son holding himself perfectly motionless so that his father will find nothing to correct. The general moved on. Julian breathed, and Marcus, at the rail, felt the whole architecture of the thing reveal itself at last. He had walked into the path of two men who used the same word, correct, and built their whole power on other people's fear of being seen. That night, Marcus did not go to the studio, and he did not sign the folder, and both of those were the loudest things he had ever not done. He sat on the floor of room 4B with his father's trumpet case across his knees and the leather fellowship folder unopened beside it. And he did the only honest engineering he knew. He drew the load path of his own life. Football here, paying for everything, carried by a body that would not last. Vaughn there, offering to take the weight. At the price of every door, every basement, every record, every Julian. And in the music room of the building, he kept drawing for a block that had been sold out from under his mother, a south-facing room sized for a man and a horn, the part of him that nobody had taught to choose itself. He did not sign. He told himself it was indecision. It was not. It was the first wall he had ever built on purpose to keep one man out, and he was too young to know that you cannot keep a master craftsman out of a building by refusing to hand him the key. He simply finds the photograph instead. Friday, late. The rain came back the way it had on the worst night, and this time Marcus did not wait to be found on the floor. He carried the trumpet case to the one place it had ever felt safe to set anything down. The velvet underground was nearly empty. Julian was there, civilian sweater, same stool, and when he saw the case in Marcus's hand, his trained face did something undisciplined. "My father's," Marcus said. "I haven't opened it since the funeral. You don't have to." "I know." He set it on the bar between them, two latches, a held silence. "I just wanted it in a room that listens." And the old trumpet player, who had watched 1,000 grieving men come down his iron stairs, crossed the floor without a word, looked at the case, looked at the boy, and offered, not to take it, only to sit with it. The three of them stayed like that while the rain ran the city overhead. Two trembling men and one steady horn. Nobody asking the others for anything, which is the rarest architecture there is. It was waiting under the door of room 4B on Saturday morning, in a plain envelope with no name, the way the note had come, the way the dangerous things always came, quietly, and already inside the house. Marcus opened it on the cold linoleum with Devon still asleep. A photograph. Black and white, grainy, shot from across a dark street through the orange sodium light. The curb outside the velvet underground. Two figures on the sidewalk. A young man in a pressed dark coat, and a young man in a navy ROTC dress uniform, every brass button catching the streetlight, his trembling hand lifted toward the other's sleeve and stopped a half-inch short. On the back, in fountain ink the color of dried blood, the impeccable hand. "Some records cannot be unmade, Mr. Thorne. Sunday, my office. We will discuss the terms of your discretion. A.V." Marcus knelt on the floor of the dorm with the general's son in his hands and the architect's signature on the back, and understood that the kiss had never been the cornerstone. This was. He had walked into the daylight thinking he was choosing between two warm rooms, and a third man had quietly been building the walls of a cage around all of it. with a single photograph for a keystone, and Julian's whole life for the load it would have to bear. Being seen